With the massive victory over the Denver Nuggets fresh in our memory, the vibes are high surrounding the Philadelphia 76ers, but they are still in search of the final pieces to take them over that championship edge. With so much talk about all these blockbuster deals with the NBA trade circles searching, I'm beginning to wonder if maybe it isn't this blockbuster deal or this massive name that is the difference. And it seems to be that the Sixers are thinking the exact same way. I dropped a video with Eddie earlier today talking about Shams Charania kind of toning down the fire about a potential massive deal for the Sixers. The word that Shams had used is he expects the Sixers to be measured at the deadline. So I wanted to dive into a potential target that does not move the meter quite in these same names, but still could make a difference. Now, before I get fully into it, I do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button, that we are so close. We want to hit 3,000 subscribers as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the month. So if you could hit that button and help us out, would appreciate it. Me and Eddie got Eddie all on board now and ready to take this thing to another level, just like the Sixers are this season. And one guy that could help the Sixers is Bojan Bogdanovic. So I'm going to begin with this article by Sixers Sense that points out him as a realistic trade target for the Sixers. And what's written here is, quote, while Detroit may not be too candid about it, they are almost guaranteed to trade Bojan Bogdanovic this season. The Pistons are the league's worst team this season, and common sense points to the franchise eventually parting ways with their widely coveted veteran to accelerate the rebuild with younger commodities and draft capital. Should the Pistons grasp this and follow through, the 76ers front office should come calling immediately. Bogdanovic is a savvy three-level scorer and one of the most consistent shooters in the league. Better yet, he makes reasonable money and only has a $2 million guarantee on his deal next season. Now, that last part about the financials is something that I want to especially harp on. That throughout this season, we've heard so much noise about this cap space plan. This is one of the reasons that Shams kind of toned down the hype about the Sixers being a massive player at the deadline. That Daryl Morey has been open about wanting to put the Sixers in a unique position, that they're the only team in the NBA with an MVP caliber player in Joel Embiid, with a rising star in Tyrese Maxey, and cap space to bring on whoever wants to join him. That this will be Daryl Morey's first true chance to put his fingerprints all over the Sixers roster and build a true championship contender as he sees fit. You would not be sacrificing any part of that vision by bringing in a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic. As he points out with the contract, while he's making $20 million this year, only a $2 million guarantee for next season. The cap hit itself, the base salary, is $19 million there, which is notable if he plays well. But as you can see, the guaranteed in the right hand is just $2 million there. So the worst case is if things go south, if it does not fit or work out in the way, you can part with the $2 million. That is not something that is going to hold up this Sixers team in the grand scheme of things. That is essentially a veteran's minimum level contract. That is about the money that Patrick Beverley and Kelly Oubre are making this season, which are both bargain deals on the veteran's minimum. Now, to touch on exactly who Bojan Bogdanovic is, I did want to jump in some of his stats. That this year he played in 19 games, started 18 for the Pistons, the league worst Pistons, still averaging 19.8 points, adding 3.7 rebounds, 2.7 assists, shooting 40.7% from 3 on 7.4 attempts per game from beyond the arc. That is the most notable part of his game to me at this point in his career. He's going to a big shot slinger. He's going to be a guy that lights it up from deep, who lets it fly, and I do think that there is a need for a gunner on this Sixers team. While I would love to hype up names like Buddy Hield as a potential target, we just saw the Pacers swing for the fences and land Pascal Siakam, and Buddy Hield is still in their team there. So I don't think he's a guy that is as available as would like to be the case, and if I'm being completely honest, nor should he be. That I think he's a near perfect fit next to Tyrese Halliburton at the fast pace that they play, the style that they play. So I do think it is a guy that we unfortunately have to take off the Sixers list here. But for Bogdanovic, maybe that is a bargain bin version of Buddy Hield. That no, this is not quite the same level of volume and efficiency, but he is a proven veteran that over his career, a 39.5% three-point percentage on 5.3 attempts per game. That is real deal efficiency and real deal volume. That anyone near that 40% mark, it should be exactly who these Sixers are targeting. And to have this type of track record, these type of long-term stats, and this long-term production on some borderline contenders is a great thing. Back in his day, Bojan Bogdanovic was also a very good defender. Now, I'm not going to be up here, gas you up, and say this is the missing piece from a defensive standpoint. I think, unfortunately, those days are behind him. But if there's a one possession situation, that if he ends up on an island, he is a guy who can compete and hold his own. That if you flash back to those Utah Jazz teams in which was the prime of his career and what he's probably remembered most for, that there were nights where he was guarding the Kevin Durant's of the world and these grade A number one stars. Now, some of that was also by default and the lack of defensive options that were on that team, but the bottom line was he was the guy that rang that bell, answered the call, and for the most part, held his own in those situations. Now, I know that I mentioned kind of the cap space plan. I did want to point this out in full, the way that it looks on the cap table. So as you can see, Joel Embiid still inked all the way through to the 25-26 season. We've got Paul Reed with that partially guaranteed deal also on the same timeline. We have Jaden Springer on a guaranteed contract for next year. And those blue options there, they are going to be free agents. That there's a lot of money coming off the board. There's going to be a lot of options for this team. And that is all by design by Daryl Morey. That bringing in these one-year vets, the Patrick Beverleys, the Kelly Oubres, Nico Batum on an expiring, Marcus Morris on an expiring. These are guys that you can bring back if you want them around, but you are not committed to them in the long run. That for the guys that seem to like it there, and honestly, I think all four of those names that I just mentioned are guys that would prefer to come back, but the Sixers hold the possession. They hold the power here for whatever they want to do. That if there's a better option, that with all due respect and how much I love Kelly Oubre, I still think this is a kind of the mindset of him as this is a stepping stone to get paid. And I certainly, at this point in time, would love for Kelly Oubre to be in a Sixers uniform next year. But if he outplays a contract number and brings himself up to a price point where the Sixers don't feel comfortable reaching, that's totally understandable. And you know what? It's still worth it for the season of production that they got from him. That for Oubre specifically, he's a guy who kind of came here to rebuild his value. That he's still below 30, still a guy that has several years left in his legs, and he's the only player in the NBA to average over 20 points per game last year and be on a minimums contract. That really does not happen, and a lot of that is because of the negative perception of his game, the losing habits that have been attached to him, and frankly, I think he's squashing a good bit of that reputation. I think this has been a fruitful relationship for both sides, for both Oubre and the Sixers, that they are benefiting from his production, and he is changing the mindset for what people think of him. I've loved everything on both sides of the floor, the competitiveness, the fire, the impact that he's made, the nights where he stepped up, hit some big threes for this team, so we will see how this story writes itself out. Now back to Bojan Bogdanovic specifically, there's another article written by Zach Buckley of Bleacher Report that kind of leaned into things as well, and I kind of touched on this further. So I wanted to read this part here, and it says, quote, "If the Sixers took a massive swing on someone like Mitchell, Levine, or Anunoby, that would probably be the only chance they get to add an impact player. All three would require a substantial amount of trade assets to send out, and they'll all clog up the cap moving forward. Mitchell and Levine for what they already make, and Anunoby for what he'd fetch next summer. You could argue this team is close enough to contention to justify making an all-in deal, but it has to be for the right player. And again, it's hard to picture either Mitchell or Levine as the missing piece, just like it's tough to imagine the Sixers have enough to land Anunoby. That's why it's more sensible swap for Bogdanovic could be the move to make. Assuming the calf strain that sidelined him so far doesn't linger, he'd be a plug-and-play source of supporting scoring, steady shot-making, and a pinch of playmaking. Last season, he not only pumped in a career-high 21.6 points, he did so while flirting with a 50-40-90 slash. He ultimately ended with 48.8% from the field, 41.1% on three-point attempts, and 88.4% at the free throw line there. So a pretty appealing sales pitch there. And another point that I wanted to piggyback off there was the comment about how close this team is. Yes, the Sixers should be doing everything possible to win every single year. You have a finite number of years with this version of Joel Embiid, this all-time great caliber player playing in the prime of his career. You don't know how long that lasts, and they do owe it to Joel Embiid to go out and give themselves the best chance to win a championship year in and year out. But the bottom line is that comes down to Joel Embiid himself, that he has to play like the version of himself that we have seen for the past 2 years, that we've seen on a night in and night out standpoint. That has to come at the biggest stage. If you can do it going head to head with Nikola Jokic in a random January game, you can do it in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. That is what needs to happen. And Bojan Bogdanovic is still a guy that moves the meter a little bit, does improve this team without selling things short. That this is not a long-term commitment, that if you do make a DeJounte Murray trade or a Zach LaVine trade or a Donovan Mitchell trade, who's probably the least likely of the bunch to get moved in that you're committed to making that your big three. That if you trade for Zach LaVine with the 4 or 5 years remaining on his deal, you're then looking at Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Zach LaVine as your big three of the future. And while you can talk yourself into that being a good thing, it better be, because there is no undo button for that. That Daryl Morey has already talked himself out of plenty of bad contracts. We saw him trade off the Al Horford situation. We saw him get rid of Ben Simmons. Saw him deal with James Harden. That you don't want to put another one of these bad opportunities on his plate. We're just seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for the Tobias Harris contract coming off the books and freeing up some financial availability for this team, and they cannot afford to waste that once again. So you can get a little bit of the best of both worlds with Bojan Bogdanovic. That you do get a win-now piece, a guy that has served on contenders before, a guy that does add an element that this team needs, and you do not shoot yourself in the foot moving forward. maybe it could be a middle-of-the-pack kind of road that is the best avenue for this Sixers team. Ultimately, there will be plenty more to break down. There are plenty more of rumors and news to discuss, but I did want to get your guys' thoughts on Bojan Bogdanovic, so don't be shy. Make sure you're hitting us in the comments. I will do my best to reply to as many people as I can. Thank you guys for watching. Once again, don't forget to smash that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.